Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us today as we continue our conversation with Professor Paul Blaschko about the role of work in the good life. My name is Ryan Cook and I'm a former student and teaching assistant of his. In our previous 3 sessions, we were also joined by Professor Meghan Sullivan, who unfortunately cannot be with us today. I know it was a hard decision for Meghan to miss this event, and she will definitely be missed in today's conversation. We started this series by covering their new book, The Good Life Method, and have since shifted in themes of work and its place in the good life, which can also be found throughout their book. Today, we will tackle these same themes in a slightly different format, as Paul and I hope to discuss our own work experiences as people at 2 different chapters of their careers. We are excited and humbled by the amount of interest in today's program, as we have many participants back with us again at our virtual fireside. At this time, we would like to thank our co-sponsors. Thank you to both the East and Illinois Alumni Club regions, the Mendoza College of Business, and FaithND for working side by side with ThinkND and helping share this event. We really appreciate your support. Today, you will have the opportunity to ask questions to Paul through the Google form that is being shared in the chat now. This will allow us to facilitate questions as efficiently as possible. We will try to address as many of them as we can within the given time constraint. And with no further ado, I would like to welcome the one and only Professor Paul Blaschko to chat with me today. Paul, happy Friday. How's it going?
Happy Friday. I mean, it feels like it's been Friday all week for me. End of the semester, end of the week. Yeah, I couldn't be more excited to be having this conversation. So thanks, Ryan, for doing this.
Thank you for taking the time, because I know it can be crazy busy at the end of the semester. How did grading deadlines wrap up? Did all the fellows get their stuff in? Are we great?
Yeah, so yeah, God in the Good Life is one of these unique scenarios where we've got at least 55, sometimes 60 people on the instructional team at any given moment, all of whom are responsible for at least one grade in the grade book. And so just coordinating that and getting that all in is, it's a huge effort, but it's also a nice time to connect with each of the people in the class. So I really enjoy having these conversations with our TAs, with our fellows, with the other instructors, because it gives you this kind of bird's eye view of like where we've come in the course. I don't know, I've just been feeling very proud all week of the work that our students have done and that our teaching team has done, because these apologies that they've written, these final papers are just phenomenal.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, it's been great.
That really is kind of a Friday feeling all week. That's what I miss. I mean, this sounds crazy, but what I miss about finals week is, when you're getting the dopamine from getting everything done. And I'm sure on an instructional side too, just kind of having everything in, having it, done is great. If there's one thing I know about GGL too, it's always continuous improvement. So that's something glad to hear that it's continuing to, get feedback and get better. For those of you who might have missed some of our first ones, GGL is God in the Good Life. It's Paul and Meghan's class that I TA'd for a couple of years, and it's still chugging along, still producing bright young philosophers. So
I think next year we're slated to teach 1,200 freshmen, and some of those will be sophomores, but 1,200 students over the course of the year, which is just incredible.
Wow, that's definitely growth from, I think it was probably 700 per year when I was in it. So it's taking over the university, as Meghan likes to say. She doesn't have her Corrupt the Youth banner in the background. Mine's behind my computer, but it's good to hear. So I'm really excited about kind of the chance for us to kind of have this one-on-one time and be able to talk, because it actually reminds me of a year and a half ago. I did check my email to be sure on the dates. COVID semester, not COVID semester when it shut down, but the first one back when we were back on campus. You were offering this lake walk opportunity to your students. And I remember, I think I got jealous of my students and tried to sign up on the student list. Can you provide some background? Do you remember it better than I do? What was this lake walk assignment?
I do, yeah. So fall 2020 is where we're at mentally. Yes. Go with me. And everybody's coming back. Notre Dame is in person, and the plan is, shifting every day, just making sure that we're taking into account the best information. I remember, Notre Dame had a Cleveland Clinic who was just like advising on, okay, do we do masks? Do we do distancing? When do we do it? How do we do it? I was teaching in the Leighton Concert Hall. So I think it's a 900 person concert hall. Massive stage, there was at least 50 feet between me and the students, and here's the huge screen that we get to teach in. And in some ways, I had like just been, I don't know, preparing for that moment. Like ever since we started teaching GGL, I just felt like, hey, look, here's this space that we have. We're going to fill it with philosophy. And one of the promises that we made to our students was, we're going to do in-person instruction. Like this is in person, right? And we'll do whatever we have to do to safely do that. And so one of the things that Meghan and I talked a lot about at the beginning and, over the summer, honestly, was how are we going to connect with people? Zoom is great, and I love Zoom. And this is a phenomenal sort of tool and technology. It's great. On the other hand, I didn't want to just have virtual office hours with my students. I have this weird experience where I hang up on a Zoom, like an office hour meeting with a Zoom, and I realize I've been alone in a room for 20 minutes and I'm still alone in this room, and it's just this existential sort of like, what was that? So one of the things that we thought was, we're gonna just make ourselves really accessible to the students. One of the experiments was providing them all with our cell phone numbers, which I think like I've kind of gone back on a little bit, with the idea like, hey, just call if you need to talk through something with respect to the class or whatever. But another one, and this is kind of the thing that has stuck around, and I still do this honestly in a lot of my classes is, hey, instead of office hours, you don't want to come to this office and like sit and, it kind of feels this formal setting. Let's just take a walk around the lake and let's just discuss the class or whatever it is that you need in terms of support from us. And so a lot of my office hours in that semester and some of my office hours since have been just walking around one or both of the lakes, depending on how many questions come up. And so at some point you got in touch and you're like, hey, I want a lake walk office hour. And I was like, that's fantastic, because like there's nothing more energizing for me than like, walking around the lake with you for 45 minutes or an hour, Ryan. So I think that's how it came about.
Yeah, no, because that semester was so altered and it was easy to feel disconnected, and especially with our class being largely incoming first year students, it was incredible, like the lack of connection and outlets that students had right away. So I think God in the Good Life especially, but also just you and Meghan taking the lead on whether it's sharing your phone numbers or having this one-on-one time is incredibly important to students who've just been dropped into a completely new environment. They're wearing masks everywhere. They're, meeting random roommates. They're doing all of this. And I'm really glad that students hopefully had an outlet to connect in the course. And if I remember our walk correctly, it was definitely a 2-lake kind of walk. And I really appreciate that, and the time that not just then, but over the past couple of years, like having the opportunity to work with you and Meghan and kind of be able to talk about these things. Because as I remember, like personally, I was getting ready for my last semester at Notre Dame. I was going into kind of making that transition. Fortunately, I had a job at the time, but we were wrapping up all those GGL deadlines, and I kind of remember like 3 things from that lake walk. So if we can virtually reconstruct it to a degree, I kind of wanted to hit on some of those topics and follow up on some things today. So the 3 things that I kind of remember that can loosely discuss or structure our conversation today would be motivation. I remember we had to hit grading deadlines coming up. So that's definitely a theme that I want to touch on. The logistical changes that we always make to GGL. That 2016 product might have been perfect when it first came out, but GGL is always getting better. And then just kind of general career advice. I remember like kind of coming to you as like, oh, I got to transition from being a student to a consultant, and all that kind of pressing life decisions, moving to a new state, all of that. So I guess where we can kind of jump in here is that idea of motivation, because you've been really motivated in this philosophy of work topic recently. So I guess, can you please update us and maybe provide background for people who aren't as familiar on how the first semester of your working life class went that just finished up?
Yeah, good. So I taught it in the fall, and then I taught the second iteration of it and just got the student papers in today. And I got to say, I'm extremely excited to read those. This is kind of a unique scenario to find myself in. Like, I can't wait to do the grading. And in part because the summative assignment for that course is to have students write their own philosophy of work, but also their own plan of work, right? So a lot of them will start by defining work, right? We take it for granted. Yeah, okay, work is what I do for money. It's paid labor. Okay, that's work, right? Yeah. But when we start looking at it philosophically, we realize that definition it doesn't quite hold up, right? One of the things that strikes us is like, I do a lot of work at home. I do a lot of work with my family. My wife does even more work at home, right? And a lot of that's not paid labor in any sort of direct sense, right? Okay, so if work isn't just paid labor, well, then what is it, right? Well, it can't just be everything, because a lot of the things that I do, even that involve a lot of exertion, like physical exertion, going for a walk with my kids or a hike, and that might not sound like a lot of physical exertion, but it truly is. Like, I've got one on my back, got one on my stomach, I've got one that I'm like kind of that's it's a lot of exertion, but that's leisure. That's a sort of relationship building, connecting time. No matter how hard that is, I wouldn't consider that my work, right? Except insofar as maybe raising kids is very generally work. So there are so many questions about even what work is that philosophy can help us start to unpack, and that then get progressively more and more practical. Because if we know what work is, or if we know how we would define work, then we're going to have some insight into this question that I think we're all always struggling with in today's world, which is, what does work-life balance look like, right? If a lot of my leisure is just working on programs for students here at Notre Dame, and it is, like, honestly, I find that incredibly leisurely. I find going for a walk with you, Ryan, to be leisurely, but also to feed right into the kinds of design decisions I have to make for the next iteration of a course or whatever. If those things get intermixed, then work-life balance isn't just going to be like, okay, 8 to 5, I'm in an office, 5 to whenever I'm at home. Like, that doesn't answer the question of how should I sort of integrate my work and my leisure. And then it gets even more practical, right? So a lot of the students in my working life class have been Mendoza students, so seniors. They're about to graduate. They were in the exact position that you found yourself in, Ryan. They're about to graduate, and they're thinking about all kinds of questions. Questions like, am I going to be a consultant forever? Well, no. Okay, so then what's my next step going to be? How do I want to make that sort of transition to the next step? Do I have to map that out now? Or do I wait until I get in the situation? But how do I make sure that once I get in the situation, I don't kind of get tied up and caught into, some sort of flow that I can't get out of if I wanted to, or. And so we move from this kind of, what is work? How would you define it? And what are the sort of good making features? What is good work versus bad work in your own experience, and, drawing on the philosophers that we've talked about in the class? And we move right into this practical, give me 3 pages on your plan. What are you doing in 6 months? What are you doing in a year? Where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years? Not with the idea that, like, okay, 10 years out, they're all going to be exactly where they think they're going to be. But now they've got kind of something sketched out that they can revisit, and that embodies in sort of more or less accurate way their actual philosophy of work. And so it's a good starting point. So I just I just can't wait to read these because I find them deeply moving. I've been meeting with a lot of students and having exactly the kind of conversation you and I had, which for me is just it's just so rewarding. It's the best part of my job.
Exactly. Yeah, because it feels like so much of life is planned out, and whether it's 4-year increments or whatever it is, like kind of reaching that next step. And I think the last time we talked was exactly that for me. It was like, okay, I have this awesome consulting job and something to do, but I don't know if I want to do that forever. So it's daunting, I think, personally, when I graduated from college, like, oh, this is the rest of your life. Like, this is it. And you can structure that time however you'd like. So hearing that students have that opportunity to kind of set those mid-range and long-term goals, that's got to be really helpful.
Yeah.
Just speaking as a former graduate.
I hope so. And I also am doing a lot of assessment insofar as the students that are going through my class are open to it. And a lot of them are. They're like just wonderful. And so, I'm surveying people who, would have liked to have gotten in the class, but it didn't fit their schedule, or they weren't able to get into it. I'm surveying the people who did go through the class. And my plan is to keep doing that and to keep bringing them back into the conversation, as guest lecturers, honestly, or as participants in these dinner dialogues that we're going to have next year. So we can keep kind of learning from each other. And so that, it's a natural sort of reflection point. 5 years out, a student who took the class is now going to come in and sort of engage in these kinds of dialogues again. So that's, I mean, that's the plan. And so far the students have been totally game, and it's been really awesome. They've been very generous.
That's really exciting. That's great to hear, because I remember sitting in those lecture halls. I was a student in Mendoza College of Business, and we'd have former students come in to give like these consulting style presentations. We'd do like case studies and stuff, but no one really came in to ask like, about or talk about where they were in their career. So I think that's an awesome kind of addition to all of that. And it's something where I hope you'd be able to show them that whole, like, here's your apology, or here's your work philosophy. Let's see what it actually looks like at 5 years out, because things change. It's crazy. And I think that's something that I'd want to ask you on kind of this whole philosophy of work, is I know it's something that you've been really into recently. Is it something that you think you'll be interested in doing for a while? Like, is this kind of a passion that you want to continue indefinitely?
Yeah, and in like a lot of different ways, honestly. So I'll give you like 3 different examples. One is, and we mentioned this maybe last time, I'm now directing a program, the Sheedy Family Program in Economy, Enterprise, and Society. It's housed in Arts and Letters, and it serves Arts and Letters and Mendoza students that want to think really seriously about both business and the liberal arts, and kind of coming from very different angles. And so some of them, again, are business majors that also want to read Dante, and that don't want to just read it on the side. They want to read it and think about, does Dante have anything to say about the structure of a modern corporation? When I get into a corporation, like, how can I be thinking in creative and systematic ways, drawing on the liberal arts education that I got at Notre Dame? Or students coming in thinking, I want to get a PhD in like organizational management, or whatever it might be, or just the history of business or economics. But I want to do that in a way that really is seriously informed by the practice of business, right? So that's one of the projects that I've got going now that I'm really excited about. We selected our first cohort a week and a half ago. I got a chance to meet them, and they're phenomenal. They're really incredible, very excited. So as I build up and run that program, we just hired an assistant director who is, again, just incredible. She's going to be coming in the summer and working over the summer and the fall to construct this gateway sort of experience for the students. I'll be thinking and working on philosophy of work throughout that sort of project. Another way that I'm thinking really seriously about it is just in terms of research. So I just got a research assistant, a grad student here at Notre Dame. And over the summer, we're going to write a paper called The Philosophy of Work. And we're going to start by asking, historically, how has work been defined and how has it changed over time? If you look at Aristotle, you get this idea of poiesis, making, right? And making is kind of the paradigm of work. If I'm a carpenter, I make a table and here's the physical thing. And if you've got that as the paradigm, then you can think about work as involving exertion and as involving craft and a kind of technical knowledge. Okay, but then the Industrial Revolution hits. And then in the modern economy, sort of knowledge work becomes this entirely new area of the economy. And there's some ways in which, this is it's kind of a poiesis, right? And we do talk about knowledge production, and we talk about research and development in companies and intellectual property and that sort of thing. But our conceptual framework is in many ways still like in ancient Greece, right? Yeah. And so we've got to think seriously about how to sort of translate some of those concepts, or maybe invent new concepts, and think really hard about the various issues that have arisen in the history of philosophy and just the history of the various traditions that we're a part of, to make sure that we're thinking sort of from a research point of view seriously enough to be providing the kinds of conceptual tools that people need to make decisions, right? So one really concrete part of this paper is we're going to write a white paper for business leaders who want to use technology to improve the lives of workers, or improve the lives of their employees, right? Yeah. So after COVID, a lot of people have thought, well, remote work could solve a lot of problems with work-life balance, with flexibility, maybe with diversity and inclusion, and sort of making sure that the right people are connected in the right way that sort of fits their lifestyle. And yet, there are also ways in which technology, just using it, just adopting a technology, leads to, and maybe even, makes worse some of the sort of worst aspects of our work, the things that we really want to get rid of. So we want to, think systematically, sort of do some research to make sure that the decisions that we make going forward, and that the decisions that companies make going forward, are informed by the best sort of principles that we can derive from, a variety of disciplines, philosophy, but also sociology, psychology, et cetera. And then the last thing I'll mention is with Walter Shire and a couple of people here on campus, he's in the computer science department. We're right now founding a startup. So this is like, so we've got the kind of academic programming, the teaching, got the research, we're also founding a startup, the purpose of which is to help people find meaning and purpose in work through the philosophy of work, really broadly construed. So a lot of people will go, get an app on their phone if they want to sort of nudge themselves to make healthier decisions. I got Noom. I love Noom. Noom is this fantastic app. It started as a weight loss app. Now it's like a behavior modification app, whatever. They use psychology. They use this research to help you set reasonable goals and actually accomplish those goals. But a lot of the people that I've been talking to outside of the university since starting this work, since starting this class, have said like, man, I want to take that class. I think like, you don't really want to take the class, right? You don't have like, 10 hours a week to sit down and read a text and then show up but you do want, and I think, a lot of people need this space, this sort of reflection space to engage in the content of the class, right? And so one thing we want to do is just think sort of, as a research community, as a university, how can we reach those people, right? And it could be a book. That's kind of the model we had with God and the Good Life. We sort of took the experience of taking the class, we built it into a book. And now if you're in the airport, you can kind of pick that up and read it on the plane. But we want to explore other modalities and see, is there a way of using, honestly, technology to help us reach people, alums and others who think like, yeah, like I'm extremely happy with my work, but I want to go deeper here and think about why. Or, gosh, something's missing here. And I just want to see if Aristotle or whoever has some insight that could help me kind of rearrange a little bit or make some sort of change that might lead to more meaning and purpose in what I do every day. So there's just a lot of fronts, and I'm just like excited to be doing this, over the next 5, 10, 15 years. There's just so much there.
That's incredible. And I didn't know about the startup. That's really exciting. And something as a young professional who, needs to structure a long-term career, it's easy to just kind of think about and jot down notes, but actually taking some of those steps. And I've heard about Noom and just kind of whether it's Noom or Headspace or anything that's kind of giving you goals and reminders to kind of actually take some steps towards those longer term goals. It gets back to why I think having the students write about their 6-month, 1 year, 5-year goals is so important, because it makes it real and it makes it something that you're actually doing during your daily life. And it's funny because actually some of this work on philosophy of work reminds me of kind of like the best practices consulting that we were doing through the Mellon Institute a couple years back. And that's something Paul was actually my last boss before I took my most recent job. So I worked with Paul on a Mellon grant in which we were providing improvement for courses and for a couple different universities. And one of the first things I learned from meeting with Paul for that was this idea of motivation, and not necessarily the long-term motivation that we're talking about right now and kind of career planning, but getting people to hit deadlines and kind of creating that cohesive work environment that works really well. So I guess while I have you here, Paul, I just kind of wanted to get your take on how do you internally motivate people? What are your strategies kind of as a supervisor, whether it's in a research relationship, whether it's in the startup, whether it's as a teacher, how do you kind of motivate people who work with you?
I think about it in the same exact way that I think about teaching a course. I've been playing around with this idea lately that grades are kind of like wages. And that, there's a lot of social psychological evidence out there that the incentive structure for good work is not as simple as, we sort of intuitively might think, right? It's not just like you see somebody doing something well, you give them more money and they do it even better. Or you see somebody doing something poorly and you say, well, I'll give you more money if you just do it better. Anybody who's like managed people knows like that's just not how that works at all. In the same way, I could give really bad grades at the beginning of the semester and just be like, oh, you're gonna have to work hard. And on the one hand, that will produce a certain kind of toil or labor or effort. At least in our context, students will do whatever it takes to sort of get the grade that they need or that they have set as their goal. But the experience is terrible if that's kind of the route you take, right? The experience is terrible because everyone just starts resenting each other. Like I start resenting, the kind of things that I'm getting back in class. I'm like, this isn't the thing that I wanted you to do on this assignment. You spent a ton of time on it, but like, this is not what I envisioned. And had you just come talk to me beforehand, I could have explained that and kind of coached you through it. And then the students resent me because it's like, oh, this is just so hard and it's awful. And like, why would I be doing this, et cetera. Now you can get to the end of the semester and maybe everybody looks back and they're like, okay, well, it was valuable to work hard and, whatever. Okay. But there's just got to be a better way, right? Now in education, there are a lot of people exploring different ideas and concepts about motivation with respect to grading. One of the things that's made a splash recently is Notre Dame has a professor who wrote this book, edited this anthology really, called Ungrading. And it's all about trying to get rid of grades in the classroom in order to improve the motivational and incentive structures. And it's just a great conversation that people are having. It doesn't work for me. Like if I don't do grades, I just don't even know. I don't even know how to communicate to students what I want them to do or what I want them to prioritize. So I am an ungrade. I'm not an ungrader, but I do take some lessons from that, right? And then similarly with my work with you, Ryan, over the past or the last couple of summers that you were here at Notre Dame, and in the internships that we're doing now for some of the Sheedy students, I take lessons from this idea that if you want people to really be invested, you've got to do something more than just sort of dangle in front of them like, well, here's a punishment and here's a reward. So what does that look like? Well, I guess my most basic insight here that I can share in like 30 seconds is something like this. People don't like doing something that they don't understand. And people do like contributing to some greater goal, even if they're not the one directly responsible for achieving that goal.
Yeah.
So if I tell you, Ryan, look, your job is to like fill out all these spreadsheets. There's a bunch of numbers over here. There's a bunch of numbers that need to be over here. You do that. Even if it turns out that that is like saving the lives of hundreds of people, thousands of people in some developing nation, if that's all I told you, you're like, what are you gonna, you're just gonna sit there and just be like, oh, even if I told you, oh, and this is really important because it's gonna save the life, okay, whatever. Or if I told you, hey, write up a report for me and put it on my desk on Monday about best pedagogical practices with, the internet, okay. But I don't tell you what is that for and what is going to be a really excellent version of that and what's going to be kind of a version that I'm like, oh, good try, but like, let's do this, let's do something else. I don't know. My experience is, I'm just going to struggle with that task. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what counts as success. I don't know if I'm doing this well or poorly. So I think the most basic insight that I've had is, you need to communicate enough to people about what they're doing and why it matters so that they can connect up their intentional efforts, their purpose, their sort of piece of the project or the role with the greater narrative, with the greater story. Like what is the story of this group? And my experience has all been, with teams of about 10 to 15 to 25. And we've always been working on a very concrete project. Like, here's the goal. And by this deadline, we're going to hit this goal. And in that scenario, I found it's not easy, but it's manageable to kind of tell that story and to bring everybody into that story. And so I can ask at the beginning, I can say, look, Ryan, at the end of this semester, Wesleyan University is going to be teaching a class that depends in large part on what you're doing right now, researching these kind of obscure texts in like digital pedagogy. They're going to be teaching a class that builds in those insights. And if we do that well, that class is going to be amazing. If we do it poorly, it might be amazing. I don't know, but it might not. I don't know. But if I can like tell that story, and as a group, we all kind of know, okay, that's where we're going, and that's why this thing matters. And then if each week when we meet, we can kind of articulate that, and I can say, hey, Ryan, will you present for 5 minutes on the thing you've been doing, and just tell your part of the story to the rest of the group, so that when somebody else gets that document that you made handed off to them, and they're going to like make it look nice, and they're going to like do graphic design on it, they're sort of seeing this as the next step in a narrative that is going to accumulate or sort of, culminate in this thing, this goal that we're all working toward. I just find that the motivation, the kind of cohesion, it naturally follows. So that's what I try to do, both in my work with students outside of the classroom, but also inside the classroom. And I've just found so many parallels between those two things. I kind of think everything is ultimately education at the end of the day. But that's very,
I like that perspective, and that's actually incredible insight. For kind of like my first year of work. And again, I work in tech consulting. So it's not the classroom. And I was fortunate to learn the technical skills from Notre Dame, but it's exactly what you're saying right now on kind of the idea of knowledge transfer and kind of that aspect of education. An idea that I've been really taken up with recently is the idea of ownership. And I think that gets to exactly what you're saying. If you don't know the mission, or you don't know your part in what's going on overall, it's tough to take ownership over things and really, as you said, like taking 5 minutes to explain like what you're doing and kind of that whole story that goes along with the documents, with the material that you're preparing. For me, it's tough. Like we have someone out this week, so I've been kind of filling in and trying to, do some of their assignments, but it's different than stuff where I know the full story. It's different than stuff where I know where it came from. I have additional context for that. And actually, one of the things that I had to take over this week is leading some of these meetings. So I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to explain. Can you talk about the motivational speeches that we do for Mellon or the GGL program? This was something that I definitely wanted to touch on today, because Paul is famous for having us give motivational speeches in our weekly sync meetings.
So I start every meeting with any team I'm working with. I like to start the meeting with a quick pump up, and I'll do the first couple whenever we have a series of meetings. And usually mine are about like the various meat I'm smoking at the moment, or something having to do with my kids, like on a walk and something they've said. And it connects up with whatever it is that we're working on. So if we're working on a project that we're at the very early stages of, but it's going to accumulate, it's going to sort of culminate, sorry, I keep mixing these words up, in this sort of incredible experience for some real human sometime. I mean, like, what better metaphor is there than the ribs that have been sitting on my smoker for the past like 12 hours, and that I'm going to get up in the middle of the night to tend, because I don't have one of these electric or like gas powered, like I do the charcoal, and I get up and I set my alarm. I get up in the middle of the night. I go out there and I'm kind of stoking these coals, and it's like, why am I doing this? I think that every time. I'm like, why am I doing this? And then I remember there's this moment, okay, where our neighbors are going to come over. We're all going to sit down. I'm going to put this on the table, and we all get to enjoy that labor together. Like, we get to enjoy the thing, right? So, I'll start with some goofy things like this. But then, I'll quickly turn it over to some of the students who I'm working with. And they, if things are going well, feel trust enough, and they feel comfortable enough being a bit vulnerable and bringing in whatever weird interests they have and whatever passions that they sort of cultivate within their work or outside of it. I remember one of my favorites was you gave a football style pump up that like I still look at the slide for every now and then.
There were slides.
What's that?
There were slides.
You had a slide, and I have that slide. I know where that slide is. Julia French, another one of our students, gave a pump up about this quilt she was making, and sort of related it to the various parts of the job that everybody else was doing. And again, that's just a way for us to connect and really to connect, not just as workers or not just as like, employees or interns or whatever it is, but just as people, and kind of build up the relationships and the trust that we really need if we're going to make an excellent thing at the end of the summer. So that's always one of my favorite parts of these kind of weekly staff meetings or whatever they are. And I think fondly on pump ups of the past every now and then.
Well, that's the thing. It still sticks with you. I remember the pump up speech that Julia gave with the quilt. Like, I don't remember, I couldn't tell you what we were working on that week, but that stuck with me. Like, it's those kind of things that kind of really orient you. I mean, in philosophy, it's the whole stargazing. It's the pulling you towards your end goal. Like your family sitting down for dinner to have the ribs that you spent all day and I guess all evening as well preparing. And so I guess from that, I'd kind of want to shift into like the second idea of logistics here, because it's great when we have these overall arching ambitions and these long-term goals. But one of the things that I really learned from working with you and Meghan was how to do logistics. Like we'd have, a scavenger hunt. For everyone in the God and the Good Life program that we had to put together. We had weekly meetings where we had to accomplish certain objectives. And for me, that was kind of my first real business experience, honestly, having to send some of these emails, make these kind of plans. And I know I touched on earlier, like GGL is always changing, it's ever evolving. And I remember being involved in some of those planning meetings, whether it's, around the lake at the end of the semester or kind of as we're going. Do you remember some of those like change management kind of best practices, worst practices, like anything that went really well when we were making adjustments to the course versus anything that kind of fell flat?
Yeah, my process for this is in the moment, every day I'm taking notes. I don't like to change things based on how I feel in the moment, because I'll often, go to class, do a quick lecture, do an activity, walk away and think, gosh, that just didn't feel good. But sometimes that's because like I didn't eat breakfast beforehand, or sometimes it's because the students didn't laugh at my jokes as much as I wanted them to, right? Awesome. And at the end of the semester, I'll get feedback, from a lot of students that'll say that was a transformative class period, right? And I'll think, gosh, like I'm really glad I didn't sort of in that moment think I'm never going to do anything like that again. But I'm also glad that I have a note to myself that says like something kind of felt weird, right? Or here's something I observed that I'd really like to change. So I am just like a copious notes taker, and finding efficient ways of collecting those up so that at the end of the semester, I'm not hunting through all my notebooks and everything else or whatever. That's kind of the first step. Also gathering feedback as we go, and just sitting down and just saying, hey, Ryan, what are you working on this week? And like, you did that, you led that meeting with Wesley, and like, what came out of that? What did that feel like? And just making sure that we're getting the feedback sort of in the moment, rather than trying to reconstruct at the end and think like, how did this go? Building that into sort of an idea for improving the class is maybe the next step. So, okay, over the course of the semester, man, we just got so much feedback on the polling software we used. People didn't like it, or people loved it, but it was clunky, or it took too long to sort of grade. Okay, so what's an idea where we can keep the best parts of that and get rid of all the parts that didn't work so well? And then developing that into a real sort of actionable, implementable idea that we then sort of beta test. So this is the part of the process that's kind of my favorite, but also, something that I think is an essential step that as an educator, I didn't really like sort of get this in the training, but I will always set up a version of whatever change I want to make on a really small scale, and I'll get students in a room. So I'll get 13 students. I'll just like send out emails and beg students, hey, can you come to this room and just like watch this quick demo lecture and give me feedback on this before I actually start building it up and really like take a lot of people's time and effort and energy into, redoing this whole thing, because that just really makes sure that we're on the right track with it. So at the end of every semester, especially if I'm developing a new course or if I'm thinking about doing a big change in one of the courses I teach, I will just have those students sit in a room. Sometimes it's honestly just the sort of core leadership team of GGL. And I just say, hey, at this staff meeting, I'm just going to do 15 minutes of this thing, or I'm going to pitch this idea, and really making sure that we're getting feedback from the people who are going to be experiencing it, from the TAs who are going to have to grade the new assignment, from the students who are going to have to do the new assignment. That just helps make the sort of change efficient and actually like effective. And again, it just saves so much time on the back end. So instead of, changing the whole quizzing system, doing that for a whole semester, and then trying to like incorporate that kind of feedback. You can just do that on a small scale right away. So that's been kind of the process that's worked really well for me.
Yeah, no, and that's great to hear, especially in terms of like note taking. I always have my notebook right here when I'm on meetings. I've got my pencil to take notes, and the feedback loops was actually, that might have been my biggest takeaway from that Melon project. Just the idea of being constantly in communication. I remember Wes calling me. He was like my direct supervisor, and he called me like right after I was returning from like a jog. And I remember doing like a mid-semester or midsummer evaluation on that. And it's a best practice that I would echo in my experience as a discussion leader for the God and the Good Life class. I was one of those guys who, even after it was no longer mandatory, I sent out the post dialogue surveys like every week. And I realized that means more to me and Paul than anyone else on the line. But we'd kind of check in and send these Google forms like, hey, how did things go? And I completely echo your sentiment of, those times where you're like, that fell flat. Like I planned this, I put so much effort, tried to do all this creative stuff. And sometimes it just doesn't work. And then, or maybe you didn't eat dinner, and then, someone hits you back on, oh, I really like this part of it. Or sometimes you were right on, and yeah, it did fall flat. And so kind of getting that continuous feedback, not changing everything that you're doing on a whim. It's the whole never make life changes after 9 p.m. Adage. But yeah, no, I think it's definitely important to have those feedback loops though, because if you're not continuously taking data, as my business analytics people would say, you don't know like the information in real time, because everyone puts on their rosy glasses at the end of the semester and we look back on how great everything was. But it's important to be pragmatic about that kind of stuff, in my opinion. And so I think part of that kind of plays at this idea too of in God and the Good Life, we had the life of action versus the life of contemplation. So we're actually making these changes, but we're balancing that with, I guess we can call it reflection, where we kind of take inventory, and also leisure. So this might be kind of a two-parter on how do you see Notre Dame preparing its students to, one, make these career contemplations, but two, to also find some leisure, because there's really busy students on campus. They do a lot. So I'm just interested in your perspective on how we balance this all out.
Yeah. One of the deepest insights that I've gotten in researching the philosophy of work is that culturally, we have a massive challenge in thinking about what leisure is or what it could be, and an even bigger challenge in thinking about contemplation or a contemplative life as something that is attractive and possible, right? Like given all of our commitments and how busy everybody is. And so one of the first steps is just starting to separate out some of these concepts. So I relax all the time. I love relaxing. And I love relaxing so that I can be more productive. I love like going home at the end of the night and watching some Netflix, because I just need to chill out. I just have to stop thinking about email for a while so that I can go answer more emails tomorrow. But some of the sort of most influential thinkers in recent years, and I'm thinking here of like Joseph Pieper and Hannah Arendt even, have really challenged us sort of as a culture to carve out a new concept, not just relaxation, not just something that actually is aimed at getting you better at doing the work, but at leisure, right? Like genuine leisure. And the way that they think about that, and Parker Palmer is another thinker here who's got a really good, really accessible way of talking and thinking about this, has been transformative for me. And so it's one of the things that I really make sure that my students sort of walk away from my class with. Here's how they think about it. They think leisure is productive activity engaged for its own sake, right?
Yeah.
So leisure is not just sitting, and it's not just, meditating. Those could be leisurely activities, but it doesn't have to be something like that. It doesn't have to be like being in a room alone with the lights off. It could be, making a table, or it could be engaging in some hobby that you've already got. But it's when we do those things, not for the sake of something else, but for its own sake, right? So, I really enjoy drawing. Really enjoy drawing lately. And sometimes I draw things because, I got this idea and I'm going to draw it up. Okay, I'm going to put that in my class. But lately I've just been taking a couple of minutes, at least a couple times a week, just to sit in a chair and just draw something, just because I think like, I want to encounter that thing whether it's my like daughter, she was like watching TV the other day and I was like, I'm just going to draw her. She's like 1.5 years old because she was in this crazy position, like physically. She was like, her hand was holding her foot above her head and she was like laying there like, and I'm like, somehow that's like comfortable. And like, you know, she's just like, this is like, and I thought, I'm not going to remember like this moment in the future. Let me just see if I can just capture this, just encounter like, you know, who she was when she was 1.5 years old. And it's got a product. It's a productive activity. I drew a little thing, right? But I'm not going to go like, you know, sell that on Etsy now. Or I'm not going to go even just like go, oh, look, Shayla, like my wife, like, look, I drew this thing. Like, isn't it great? You know, I'm not doing it for those reasons. I'm doing it because of itself, because it's an activity that I want to do for its own sake. Some people like playing music, playing jazz or something, or playing rock music, right? And they do it for its own sake. Now, 2 quick thoughts. Pieper thinks that when we're engaged in leisure, we're encountering reality in a really direct way. So if I'm drawing, I have got to be outside of myself, outside of my head. I've got to be paying attention. And I've got to be drawing on these virtues and these skills, attentiveness and patience, that I'm not always activating in my active life, right? Like I am not patient at all when I'm answering emails. I'm just like doing it as fast as I can. But you're activating these parts of yourself, your parts of your soul, that Pieper, that Aristotle, that others, they think are essential. Like if you're not taking enough time for that, you're kind of missing out on one of the core sort of reasons for being, like what, like your purpose as a human. Right. So just distinguishing that has had a huge impact. I'll talk about that in my class. And then I'll challenge my students. I'll say, actually, I don't know. I had like this, I don't do this typically. I typically take the whole 75 minutes in part because like they're paying for it, right? I tell them this. I'm like, I'm not going to like let you out of class early or whatever. But on the day we talked about leisure, I gave them the last 20 minutes and I said, I want to invite you. You don't have to do this. I'm not going to grade it. I want to invite you to take this extra 20 minutes that is already built into your day. I'm going to give it back to you and I'm going to invite you to do something leisurely with it. Whether that's just meandering, walking to the lake, sitting down and saying a prayer, drawing something, maybe even playing video games. I don't know, whatever it is, right? Go do that. And then just take a minute to reflect on it and think, do I want to try to build more of that into my day on a regular basis? And it was just this rewarding experience. Students came back and we started with a discussion. What did you do that was leisurely? And like, how did you reflect on it? And it was just one of the most rich sort of pinnacle moments of the semester, just to hear what they kind of reported back. So that's kind of the first step, I guess, in trying to recover some leisure and some notion of leisure in our culture and in you know, our everyday lives, I think.
That's great to hear. And something that I definitely took away from might have been chapter 7 of the Good Life method book was that idea of building in time for ATLIC goals, just doing it for its own sake, not because you're not drawing the picture to sell it on Etsy or even to show it to someone. Like it's truly dedicating that time because you enjoy the action. Anything that comes out of the action is a bonus, but any skill developed, anything there. But that was definitely like kind of an eye-opening takeaway for me. And I would echo the whole idea of, not to get too existential with it, but wow, average life expectancy is 80 years. And if, you know, depending on who you choose for your mind and body philosopher, if this is your time with your body, like please draw, play music, you know, cook dinner, cook ribs, like that kind of stuff, because that's really the essential nature of being here and being able to do those things. I think that's incredibly powerful and just kind of experiencing reality.
So Ryan, I have a question if you're up for it.
Please, yeah.
I saw somebody throw a question into the document here that I'm just like really eager to answer. So if you don't mind shifting to questions for just a second. The one that caught my eye first, the first question that I saw here was, are you incorporating any insights from Labor Room Exertions or John Paul II? And the answer to that is yeah, absolutely. I'm reading a lot of John Paul II right now and a lot of Karol Wojtyła. So before he became Pope, he was known as, and I'm butchering that for sure, it's a Polish name, Karol Wojtyła. But one of the things that really surprised me is, so we do read a couple encyclicals in the working life class, Rerum Novarum, a part of Rerum Novarum, and then Laborum Exertions, where Pope John Paul II is talking about work as a vocation. and about, distinctively sort of Catholic ways of thinking about work. And as I got into that, I just started looking at more and more of his philosophy. He was a pretty prominent intellectual, Polish intellectual, and wrote a really important book, not to get too into the weeds, but on phenomenology, called The Acting Person. He was also an actor. I don't know. He's a very fascinating guy, very fascinating biography. And there's a lot of insights. There's a lot of insights that end up being pretty practical. Our students read through Labrum Exertions and make a lot of connections, especially about the way in which we can or should not use technology in our work, just given the sort of insights and the wisdom that comes through Catholic social teaching and the Catholic tradition. So I just wanted to say I absolutely love Labrum Exertions, and for sure we're doing a bit of work with that in the class. I don't know if there's other questions, Ryan, that we want to kind of jump to, or I'll kind of turn it back over though.
Let's make that switch though, because my clock's actually slow on my computer. So I do want to take some audience questions, and especially this one from South Bend, kind of apropos conversation I was having earlier today with Kelsey from ThinkND, just on the idea of overlapping your hobbies with work. That's something where if you're doing the thing that you love for a career, that's kind of the goal, right? But at what level do they kind of bleed into each other? And you no longer have those AT-lick outlets, whether it's, playing music or drawing, if your entire income is based on, your ability to do those things. Will your life be out of balance if you kind of fully integrate those hobbies into your work?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is a version of the work-life balance question that is deeply interesting.
Yeah.
So like I said, thinking about work-life balance as like these hours I spend in this location, these hours I spend in that location, it's sort of maybe a first step or a crude way of kind of starting to think about the question. But I think, this question of whether we should do what we love is a really deep and important question. Some of my students come in and I ask them day one, like, what are your career goals? Like, what do you want to do? And some, start by saying, well, I really love art. And so I want to be an artist. I want to produce this art for the rest of my life. 8 hours a day, I want to sit and be doing art, And we look at people who have done that and who are really glad they've done that. And we look at people who say, once I started getting paid for my art, the kind of joy and passion drained out of it. And I discovered I can't just do that. I could do that, but I got to do something else. And I also have to reach outside myself and find something to replace whatever role that was playing in my life before I started doing it for work. And I think, Aristotle talks about phronesis, or practical judgment. And I think that is just going to be one of the virtues that's really key here. I don't think there's general principles about the extent to which you should turn your hobbies into your work, or how much you should love what you do, or how much you should turn your work into your hobbies. Honestly, that's kind of where I'm at in my life right now, is that I have a couple of hobbies, but like mostly when I'm not working, I'm with my kids and with my family and just completely as present to them as I can be. And yet there are some things that I can do that I'm lucky enough to do in work that are really, hobbies. Like I get to write up reports for other universities about how to incorporate digital best practices into their curriculum. That's fun. Like that's very fun and exciting to me. Like that's the kind of thing that I would compare to like building a table just for its own sake, So I think the key there is just, having thought enough about these things and having thought enough about the sort of good life method as a whole to recognize when something's a little off and you think, man, I am just kind of burning out, or I'm just drained at the end of every day. How do I locate the real issue here? Is it that I'm not spending enough time away from my work? Or is it that my work is too closely connected to the things that I love? Or is it that my value and identity is so incorporated into my work that, given that I'm a public school teacher in an under-resourced school, my self-esteem is suffering because I just see that there are things that I cannot do for these kids that need to be done, right? So there, I think, again, just having this kind of broad base of concepts and ideas and thinkers that you can draw on is vital. And then I think the real key is having enough of that kind of phronesis, enough of that practical wisdom to be able to think okay, I'm going to try this as an experiment. I'm going to take 5 hours every weekend and go fishing. And then after 2 weeks, you're like, nope, that's not it. Okay, I'm going to take 6 days a year and go on a retreat. And you're like, yeah, maybe that's it. I did one of the practical experiments I tried just this week was instated Library Day, which is a day at the end of every year, according to me now, first Wednesday in May, where I just go to the public library with a couple of books, and I just look for a bunch of books, mostly poetry, honestly. And I just sit down, and all day I just read anything. And I don't answer emails. I don't, call anybody. If people want to kind of come in and hang out and read with me, that's great. And that was, to my mind, a super successful experiment. Like, that was so refreshing and so energizing. And even just after a day, doing things that I mostly do in my day job, which is just reading stuff, I found myself like ready to like come back and just, do another 6 months, do another whatever it is before the next one. So that's I guess that's where my mind goes.
Definitely. Yeah, no, because there needs to be that balance. But if you're truly doing what you love, though, and it's got to come back to the phronesis, in less philosophical terms, trusting your gut, trusting your instincts, and kind of what feels right. And I like the idea of creativity there, trying new things. Like, I don't think I wake up early enough to go fishing or anything, but I might have to institute a library day here. I spend too much time with emails, not enough time.
Yeah.
But I guess this will kind of be our closing question here as we close things out. Can you pretend that we're all in the working life class? We've just handed in our final assignment. What is your advice to us on kind of taking next steps in a career?
All right. So here's what I do on the last day of the working life. I hand everybody this medal. It's a Saint Benedict medal. And Saint Benedict has, he revolutionized sort of Western culture at a time when there were a lot of issues going on. There were a lot of problems, social problems, a lot of things going on. And he really invented this kind of monasticism, this kind of lifestyle where people could come, focus on this core mission, and then go out into their communities and meet the needs of those communities in a really real and direct way, right? They were caring for the poor. They were like cultivating crops to feed people. And he's got something called the rule of life, right? So he's famous for this phrase, ora et labora, work and pray, right? Balance these things in your life. And what I ask my students to do is I say, look, you might be Catholic, you might not be Catholic. You might find this particular story really inspiring, you might not. But what I do want you to do is I want you to think about your plan of work as your sort of rule, right? The rule of Orion. I want you to think about this as the way that you sort of make concrete whatever philosophy, whatever wisdom, whatever you're drawing on from the class or not. And I want you to see that as a living document, as something that you can revise and that you can put into dialogue with other people, so that when you hit these moments of transition, because we all do, and for some of us, for me, those moments can be, more or less crisis moments, midlife crisis or, quarter life, whatever it might be. So that when you hit that and you kind of think, I don't know which way to go, I don't know where to look, you've got something to go back to.
Yeah.
You've got a starting point. And so that's the form of the speech that I give. Usually I'm bawling, I'm crying, but in a good way. And then we go out into the world, and then we do our work.
That's awesome to hear. And I think that's exactly where we are right here. I know this is the end of the speaker series. And hopefully this has kind of provided our listeners and us personally with kind of some of that living document, some reflection time, where hopefully now we can go forward and do the whole labora part. I actually got to meet with my boss in a couple minutes, so I'm going to have to wrap it up here. Thanks for joining us. I just want to say thank you again to Paul, to Meghan, to Kelsey, to Mary, to all the folks at ThinkND for organizing this series, letting me be a part of it. I hope this series has provided all of us here at this virtual fireside with some of the joy and wisdom that I've gained from working with you guys. Final reminder, if you haven't picked up the Good Life Method, I think I have it somewhere down here, folks. Please get it at your local book retailer, either online or physical. Please give it a glowing review on Goodreads and check out the audio of our first three now fireside chats in which we dive deeper into the themes. Meghan and Paul also have Think ND series on the website covering similar philosophy topics called What Makes a Life Good and What to Believe in Uncertain Times. These two video series, as well as the fireside chat recordings, can be found at think.nd.edu. If you enjoyed today's program, please note we have many similar live events at ThinkND. Please check them out and register to participate. These talks are free and open to the public, so please do share with your family and friends. I'll give Meghan's usual reminder that Plato says all philosophy is preparation for death. And on that note, thanks again, Paul, for joining us today. Thank you all for being with us, and have a great rest of your Friday.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.